you. Thank you for the introduction. Before we get started, I have a short poll to help us get a better idea of who our audience is. And I will be sharing my screen right now too. All right, so this poll is just get an idea of who our audience is and whether or not any of you have already started partnerships with a secondary or a higher education educator counterpart. Again, my name is Jocelyn Ireland. I'm an instructional design librarian from Mohawk Valley Community College.
My name is Mike Hoover, and I teach social studies at PTech BOCES in New Hartford, New York.
Great, so the ultimate goal with us coming together was to introduce high school students to the college library environment and college level research skills. Mike will be providing an overview of the PTech program and the international assignment that initiated our partnership. Then I will go over the active learning activities I use to teach the information literacy skills in the library, and then we'll end with a discussion of ideas of how secondary educators can collaborate with college librarians. Oh, let me take a look at those poll results before I turn it over to Mike, actually. All right, so I'm gonna end the poll and share results. So it looks like we got quite a mixture. Lots of college librarians and quite a few secondary educators. And many of you are already having partnerships with a college or high school. That's great to see. All right, thank you. All right, I'm going to turn over to Mike.
So, yep. So I'll give you a little profile of the program that I work in so you can understand the nature of the partnership that exists between Jocelyn and I and our institution. So I work at OHM BOCES in the PTech program, and that stands for Pathways in Technology Early High School College. This is how our process is laid out in terms of how our students progress through our program. So in 8th grade, our students apply to our program from our component school districts that we service. In 9th grade, after they're admitted, they spend the first 2 years on our campus here at OHM BOCES. And mainly what we do here is we provide our high school education for our students. They do take some college classes with us on campus, but after year 3, we have some of our accelerated students who go on to Mohawk Valley Community College, where they pursue an associate's degree. And some of our students stay with us at year 3, and then by year 4, 5, and some of us stay through year 6, they end up going to MVCC to pursue their associates. If they're deemed not ready, either professionally or academically, to go to MVCC, they receive their high school graduation requirements through us, and they often go to our CTE program, and that's Career Tech in our building here. So in terms of the assignment, in terms of our program, we have very, very strong high school outcomes. And so with that in mind, the idea from this assignment came from my initial teaching position. So before I taught at OHM BOCES, I was a teacher for 7 years in a small school district in Sullivan County, New York. And my mentor and I felt that students didn't really have the research skills that were necessary to progress to the later high school stages and college. So our thought was that we would collaborate with the high school librarian that we have here, that we had at Eldred, which was the school district that I worked in, and that we would try to have a night where everyone got together and they got excited about academics, and they would do some research in social studies. So when I moved on to PTech, there wasn't a physical library here on our campus. So what we decided to do was, because we didn't have that natural library here, we decided to partner with MVCC to see if our students could actually do research on MVCC's campus. So it was, because we didn't have the high school library in our building here at BOCES, we ended up doing our research there. So as far as the assignment related to International Night, which is what Jocelyn and I worked together on. So students are given an assignment where they essentially research any topic in world history. And for that particular assignment, they are going to construct a claim, which is what the goal of the project is, and they're going to write a 4-body paragraph essay, and they are going to construct some type of visual representation. The biggest thing here is that they are acquiring research and they are looking to prove some type of claim. And it is totally up to them. The requirements of the project say that sometimes it could be based on like an agent of change, their topic, and they have to think about how their topic is an agent of change. So in terms of what this assignment used to look like before COVID. So prior to COVID, students, they wrote their 4-body paragraph essay. They had their claim. That part really didn't change between pre-COVID and post-COVID. But what did change quite a bit is what I'm talking about in terms of this visual representation. So on International Night, prior to COVID, we had our parents, our business partners, our academic partners all come into our school. And our students sort of stood around their project, kind of like fair style, where they would deliver an elevator speech, essentially. And in that elevator speech, their job was to deliver a claim and what the most important parts of their project were and what their visual representation represented about their project. And I'll give you an example of one. So what you're looking at on that slide is a student who did the history of the wedding dress. And what she found was that based on her findings, that the reason the wedding dress turned white was because of Queen Victoria. And she has a visual there of the wedding dress. She also has swatches if you take a close look in front of the dress that she has. And I suppose that all those different colors represented different things that people were wearing to their wedding prior to Victoria. So that was a great example of a visual representation. In terms of their paper, so a typical claim might look like what you see there. Now that comes from a student's presentation, and that's the thing that says the British Rosenfels are a result of Machiavellian principles. He's going to do his project on the British Empire, and he wanted to prove that the British Empire used Machiavellian principles in terms of how they attain power. So this is just an example of what a student may try to prove in terms of the project. So students would go to MVCC, to the library, and they would conduct research. And Jocelyn's going to talk more about that in a few minutes. But after COVID struck, we decided that we would still go ahead and do this night because we felt that it was such a powerful assignment for students to engage in some type of research and challenge them to think at a higher level. So in terms of the difference between pre-COVID and post-COVID, as that previous slide indicated, students before COVID all got around in this crowded room, and we had our partners there, we had our community there. But when COVID struck, we obviously couldn't do that anymore. So it changed the nature of how the project was going to be delivered. And it even changed the nature of how Jocelyn was going to coordinate with us. So Jocelyn zoomed into my class a few times. She helped my students with their research. We were still able to get our students books from the library. And the biggest difference between what it looked like before and after was that instead of us all getting together in a crowded room, students had 10 minutes to present their findings, almost like in a dissertation style. And there was part of me that really liked the way that this presentation wound up, because students were delivering a presentation and they were really able to focus in on their claim. But that sense of excitement that existed before COVID really wasn't present in the same way that you can possibly duplicate. So I think as we move forward with this, we're sort of going to juggle those two things together. And the visual representation was just their presentation this year. There was nothing physically that a student brought with them. We'll see how that turns out in the next year as we progress through this. Now, we have some pictures, I think, on the next slide. Yep. So if you take a look, this is just what the presentation looked like this year. Student in the bottom left is presenting a presentation by Google Slides, and he's delivering that presentation on the relationship between Iran and the United States. And how the two countries, he's looking to prove how the two countries, it's all boiled down to this big misunderstanding that's related to their history. And he had a lot of historical evidence to back that up. And if you look in the middle slide, that's another presentation regarding U-boats. You can see that not only did we have people in the room, but we had people zooming in. That's the Promethean board we use, which is our smart board. And you can see on the right, if you look really closely, you could see folks who are zooming into the class. And we had winners that day, and our partners, our business partners, our college partners, when they viewed a presentation, I had them vote. And we dished out 2 trophies for first and second place based on the requirements of the project. And those were from our Fab Lab that we have here through our STEM teacher. So those are 3D printed.
Great. So back in 2018, I was contacted by a different P-TECH coordinator asking if I could give a group of high school students a tour of the library and overview of our website. So that's how I got in contact with Mike and his social studies class. So after Mike and I talked about the International Night expectations, I knew the students would benefit more from just a tour of the library and overview of the website. Now, this was a real new experience for me. Even though I've been teaching for about 10 years, I've never taught high school students. I've taught young kids, seniors, everything in between except for high school. So it was new for me. And I really didn't know a whole lot about the P-TECH program, which I feel a little guilty about now because it's turned out to be such an enriching partnership. One of my goals with this meeting with the students was to provide them a positive initial experience of not only college level research, but the college library environment. I didn't want this to be an intimidating experience for them, because even though they may have been on a college campus already, they hadn't been to a college library before and seen our materials. So I wanted this to be positive and also, teach them good research skills and the type of research materials that were available to them. So the very first day, if I could backtrack a little bit. So I've met with them for 3 years now, and the lesson has changed every single year, and it's going to continue to change. But something that's always been at the core of each time I've met with them has always been active learning activities. So this was the very first one I designed the first year I met with them. So I developed a group learning activity. So the students were divided up into groups, and each group was assigned a different section of the library. So on the left-hand side, you'll see kind of like a layout blueprint that I did of the library. And then I just kind of circled a section, and then each group had unique questions to answer about that location of the library. So it forced them to not only kind of investigate the space, investigate the purpose of it, what they can find there. But they also were forced to talk to the staff in that area too. So get to know who was there to try to kind of break the ice a little bit. And on the right-hand side, these are the questions I used for the group that was assigned to the reference desk area. And so I thought this activity was good. So after each group had time to investigate their location, we came back together as one big group and visited each section. And so then that group would kind of present on what they found and tell them the answers to the questions that they had prepared. And then I would fill in the blanks and kind of expand on some important points. And then after that, we went back to the computer lab and I did my usual interactive demonstration about research activity, research strategies, finding sources, and then they had some independent time to find sources after that lecture. And this group activity, I thought it was good. I think it accomplished many tasks, but I wasn't quite satisfied with it. So the next year, I tried something a little different. So I tried, I scrapped that group activity and did a goose chase scavenger hunt instead. And so those of you that have never used Goose Chase, it's an online scavenger hunt game. And it's usually played through on mobile devices. So I borrowed iPads from our IT department and preloaded the app so it was ready to go for them. And so each group had to complete missions. And it was an incredibly successful activity. One reason why it was so successful is that students genuinely had a lot of fun with it. And it was also actually a little quicker than that previous group activity. So I had more time to reflect on the activity and more time teaching them skills. And also it really loosened them up because they were having fun. Afterwards, they were much more energized and ready to engage and ready to talk. When the previous group activity, I felt like it was a little draining for them. And it was a little intimidating because they had to present in front of their peers. So it was a little scary, I would imagine. So this one was just a lot more fun and it accomplished, I felt like, more learning objectives. So it got them practicing searching the library databases even before I really showed them how to do it. They were just kind of thrown into it. I mean, I showed them where the library database was and then they kind of just had to figure it out for the scavenger hunt. And they did fine. And it also forced them to explore the physical library space, the services, and the library staff. So it accomplished a lot all at once. And again, it was just like, the energy that was so nice. So this is a screenshot of the different missions that the scavenger hunt included. As you can see, they had to go to certain places in the library. They had to research on the databases, find a book through the website, and they had to go talk to staff. Most of the missions, they had to take a picture to prove that they did it or take a screenshot. And one, they actually had to take a video themselves finding a peer-reviewed article through the database. So here are some pictures, some submissions of their missions. This mission, they had to find the bestsellers collection, take a picture of their group reading one of the bestsellers. So you can see they're having fun with it. They're kind of goofing around a little bit. This one's the group had to go talk to the reference library and take a picture with her. So they kind of got introduced not only to the librarian, but to show we're fun people too. We're not the authority figure that's always going to be shushing you. We can have fun too. And here they had to find a book through the online catalog by a particular author and then go find it on the shelf and take a picture with it. So again, that was a really successful activity, but unfortunately after COVID shut down, I was no longer able to do that. So I had to change it up again. I'm hoping to return to that activity once we go back in person, hopefully this fall. So With the COVID shutdown, one positive thing that came out of it was Mike invited me to attend each one of his classes for 2 days instead of one. So the first day was formal instruction online, and I still want to incorporate active learning activities to engage with the students. However, that's a little harder when you're remote. It's still possible. So my idea was to have an electronic bulletin board, pose questions to them, and then they would answer through this bulletin board. So I used the app Padlet, and I also used Padlet to develop some mind mapping activities. And unfortunately, I was not aware that the students were using, most of the students were using like school issued laptops that did not allow outside apps like Padlet. So that was unexpected barrier, but Mike helped me do a quick transition to Jamboard, and it accomplished the same thing. It was fine, but it was a little unexpected. So some questions I had them respond to was, what type of information sources could you use for research? And so their responses opened up a really great discussion about primary and secondary sources, all these different types of sources you could find on the internet, and also different types of sources you'd find on the library databases. And then that was a good segue to talk about how was researching through Google different from researching through the library databases. So they would offer, their prior knowledge, what do they already know? And then I could build on top of that through my lecture. And so throughout my lecture, I was, constantly trying to interact with them through the Jamboard and through the chat of getting them to, engage with me. Something different also with this year is I incorporated more mind mapping activities and related to that, keyword brainstorming. And then like usual, showing them different search strategies of finding things on the library databases, recommended databases, and also online tutorials. And I noticed that students really liked me showing examples of searches that didn't work very well, that weren't very successful. And the reason why I do that is to, kind of mirror their experience. So students often put a question into the library search box, or they'll put a sentence in, or they'll use the keywords like encyclopedia article about Bosnian culture. And that's clearly not as a successful strategy as other keywords. So I showed them searches that didn't work, and I showed them how to revise the search and make it better. And we also had a discussion about the type of language that the average person uses is probably not the language that the writers and researchers are using. So that's an important part for students to understand. And that also gets them realize that the librarian is there to help as a consultant, as a collaborator, to help with your search. They are, time savers. I also provide examples of mind mapping. So this is one example of the 10th grade class mind map that I showed them. So the question that was posed was, why did Benedict Arnold sell the West Point plans to the British? So I showed them like a mind map based on an encyclopedia article, showed how you can use this mind map to use keywords and develop more research questions. And then the answers to those research questions can be the basis of your claim, which is like the main point that their teacher really wanted them to get to, develop a claim, which is one of the hardest parts for this assignment for them. And this is a picture of one for the 11th grade class. They had to do an U.S. international relations topic. So this is an example of international relations with having to do with the Bosnian War. All right, so the first day, again, it was a lot of instruction, active learning, and then the second day was a lot less formal. It was mostly just the students have time to do independent research. So at the beginning of the class, I just reminded them of, effective search strategies and encouraged them to use me as a resource. And then they just had the class time to research. And then I and then I was there to help. And so Mike did something really nice and was really helpful. He provided a list of the students and also the topics they had chosen. So I already had that list, and I did a little bit like pre-research to find, some helpful resources that I could recommend to them. So throughout the class, I was sending private chat messages and saying, hey, I'm not sure if you found this ebook yet. I think, like chapter 3 would be really helpful for you, and send them a link to it. And one of his requirements was, actually, I'm sorry, before COVID, they had to use a physical book. So which is kind of like a main reason why I had them explore the library space. And then during COVID, that was not a requirement, but he highly encouraged the students to use physical books. And so we developed a list of books that they had requested, and then we coordinated a meet, and we transported the books and delivered the books to the students. So a lot of them still used physical books even with COVID. So we got the circulation statistics for that, yay. So it was really, really helpful for this day 2 to have students have class time to do independent research, but with a librarian present. So yeah, that was very successful, and I hope we'll continue that in the future.
So when students were, I should say as students were doing their research, one of the things that I think students struggle with at the high school level, and I'm sure at the college level too, is taking their research, analyzing their claim, and then writing all that into their paper. The ability to do that for students is difficult. So I sort of came up with this method, and I didn't invent this by any stretch of the imagination, but I use bib cards, and I've been using Google Docs to leverage the power of bib cards. And what I did was I set it up so there is a citation that students have to put, and that's an MLA citation. They put their evidence from this is from a book, and then they have to think about how they're going to tie it to their claim. And they also have to think about what kind of source they're using as well. So this is an example from a paper that ended up being fairly strong. This particular student was writing about how unrestricted submarine warfare in World War I drew the United States into the war. And you could see, if you look at the language a student is using, he's constantly thinking about how that evidence ties into that. Another example of that, same paper. If you go to the next slide.
Tell me to go to the next slide, sorry.
So another example of this, and this is from a primary source. Oh, you're good.
Oh, sorry, let me go back.
I think it might have been delayed on my end. Oh, you're good. So on the slide that we're going to show you, this is a primary source. And again, same thing that this student is doing. They're taking a quotation, they're thinking about how it relates to their paper. And what I found was this year, interestingly, I would say overall students in 10th grade, which is where this project came from, were very strong. And I found that very interesting. It may have been just because we dedicated so much class time to it, but I also would like to think that this process also helped quite a bit. So if you go to the next example, this one comes from a paper that wasn't as strong, but this student was able to organize their thoughts, even if they're not really doing what I want them to do. So this student's paper was about the history of ballet, and she really didn't know what she wanted to do with her claim. But what she was doing here is she was taking evidence and she was thinking about how she would organize it. And in this particular example, she ended up setting up her paper by region. So what was the history of ballet like in Russia, in Italy, in France? And I felt that this process really helped her set up her paper so she was able to generate a stronger paper than she otherwise may have.
So I just want to share a few reflections on with this experience and working with high school students. So again, this was my first time teaching high school students. So I wasn't quite sure, should I treat them any differently from my typical college student? Particularly with like the first activity I did, the group activity. Now our library was open. We had a lot of college students around. So I was a little worried, how are they going to be, high schoolers in a college library and doing an independent activity. So I asked Mike if he thought they were mature enough to handle this. And he gave me the green light, and they did, and they're absolutely fine. And a lot of my lessons and my active learning activities, they were very similar from my high school classes. Excuse me, my college classes. So I really didn't treat them any differently from a college student, and I'm sure they appreciated that. That I clearly showed trust in them, and they did absolutely fine. I also noticed they were quite unfamiliar with the idea that as a librarian, as a consultant, as a collaborator with their project. And I don't think that's quite uncommon with college students either, but I seem to sense a lot more hesitancy from my high school students to use me as a resource to help them the process. So after our first meeting, like the second and third year I met with them, I tried to, emphasize the fact, a librarian can save you time and stress and make the research process a lot less stressful for you. So, it took some time to, gain their trust. But as soon as they did, I feel like they found that a really rewarding experience to have an adult figure librarian to help them with the research. And so we weren't, that authority shushing figure. We're there to help them along in the process. And again, this is not totally unexpected, but they had a lot of trouble identifying what types of sources are most appropriate for their assignment. So when you typically do a first initial search on the library website, the vast majority of sources that are going to come up are going to be coming from peer-reviewed scholarly journal articles. So I don't think that's something that they're really familiar with. So showing them, what types of sources they should start out with. I start out with those encyclopedia articles or a reliable website to help you get familiar with your topic, develop that mind map, start developing good research questions, and then you're more prepared to, I call them the meatier sources, the ebooks or scholarly articles through the library website. So that was certainly a learning experience for them, and something that I've learned to emphasize more in my lesson, talking about the different types of sources that they will encounter. And again, not an unexpected occurrence, but they're very heavily reliant on Google sources. So it's certainly a hurdle we had to overcome. And related to this, they really had little patience for real research. So I kept on emphasizing this research takes a lot of time. You have to start it early. You have to be critically reading as you're reading your sources, write notes, ask yourself questions as you're reading. And I just got the sense that that was hard for them to concentrate and actually thoroughly read their sources and engage with them. And again, not unexpected, but developing a claim and a thesis was incredibly difficult. And it's something I remember as a student too. I feel like their first, what they want to do is to, write a paper all about X, Y, Z. So I'm going to write all about this. when they should be, you know, something more targeted and defending an argument, defending a claim. So that's just, it's just different for them. As I said in the beginning of the presentation, this lesson is going to continue to change. So Mike and I have talked, and how it's going to change for the fall is I'm going to meet with them. Instead of 2 days, we're going to move it up to 3 days. So I'm going to have a little more time to focus on some things that we've noticed that they continue to struggle with. So the last time I met with them, when I met with them for the 2 days, I demonstrated how to do a mind map and how it can be really helpful for them. And I encouraged them to do one, but it wasn't a mandatory thing. So this time it's going to be mandatory. They're going to have to do it, whether they like it or not, they're doing it. So I think it's going to be really helpful for them to organize their thoughts. It's a good pre-writing strategy, but it'll also help them identify good keywords to use, develop good search strings, and develop research questions. And these research questions should help them develop a better claim. And then I'm going to provide a little more examples of how you can use research questions to shape a claim. So a little more emphasis on things that I know that they struggle with. So I feel like every year we're just going to get better. And hopefully one of these 3 days we'll be able to meet in person and do that goose chase scavenger hunt.
So just in terms of some collaboration ideas between high school teachers and college libraries, I think the partnership between Jocelyn and I was obvious because there was no physical library on our campus. But I think that there could be a role for college librarians that sort of connects teachers and high school librarians, and that some type of professional development could exist to that end. Other ideas in terms of collaboration, a debate club with a partnership with an academic library at the college level, and just using the resources that are already available. So I work for BOCES, it's a regional organization. Mohawk Valley Community College is our regional college, and there's a lot of potential there to organize professional development and ensure that students are being provided strong as possible education. And I think that it could potentially play a role.
And tag on to the last point. So I'm a member of a school library advisory council that's organized by our local BOCES program. So one of the purposes is to get academic librarians and school librarians to talk and talk about the transition from high school to college. But it's not a topic that is talked about very much. We have a yearly conference, and there's always one session that talks about that topic. But I don't feel like whether it really comes out of it, any follow-up. So there could be more. There's a great possibility with that, but time is always a factor, and there's always more pressing issues, I feel like, when we have our advisory council meetings that need to be addressed right away. So that's always. So we would love to hear about what you are doing to collaborate with either a secondary educator or a college librarian. And according to our poll at the beginning of the session, it sounded like it looked like about 40%, if I remember correctly, we're already doing it, and that's really wonderful to hear. So if someone could please share in the chat a brief description of what you're doing, I would love to hear about it. And we were hoping to do a breakout room activity, but then we found out that wasn't a possibility. So unfortunately, we have to rely on the chat, but that's okay. And if, so we'll hopefully get some responses to that. But while that is coming in, Maybe we can start on the Q&A too. I'm just reading the chat too. So Jody's saying that we work with middle school and high school, TAG groups working on National History Day projects. That's very nice. Yeah, dual credit students. Oh, Donna, that sounds so wonderful. Community college librarian to your school. Yeah, that's really what I kind of had in mind. And I would love to volunteer if anyone would like me to virtually attend their high school class. I would love to join you. Yep, Upward Bound, I see from Gail. Yep, dual credit students, yep. Thank you everybody for sharing in the chat. All right, so while those are coming in, so looking at the Q&A, Sally asked, can you share some student topics? So, after some of this question, I think we did a few of those. So the history of the wedding dress and history of ballet. Mike, do you want to share some more?
Sure. So I talked about the students that had the Machiavelli topic and how that compared to the British Empire. But like students have had, I'm jogging my memory here, but students have had topics really across the board in my history as a teacher. Like I had one student who, and this project is standing out to me, did the history of hair. And they had like mannequins of different like hairstyles on International Night. A long time ago, I am remembering an example of a student that did the Great Wall of China, and for his visual representation, he had Rice Krispie treats of the Great Wall of China. So like it really is across the board. Like I am just looking to like stimulate their curiosity more than anything else. So like some of the topics are more of your typical topics, but some of them could be something as far ranging as like the history of the nursery rhyme. I really don't care what they explore as long as they're interested.
Thank you. I see Neil's question about the Smithsonian Learning Lab platform. And I saw in the chat you had shared a little bit about that. And I have heard of that, but I haven't used it for my classes yet. Mike, did you want to add anything to that question?
I don't see a question there. What's the question?
The question is, have you used the Smithsonian Learning Lab platform to allow students to develop digital collections as part of the project-based learning?
No, I haven't. But thank you for sharing that resource.
And the business partners, Mike, you want to address that one? How are business partners involved?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the questions. I don't know why that's happening. Yeah, in terms of business partners, so part of our program is like the whole point of PTAC, and maybe I didn't do a super great job of explaining this part, but the end piece of PTAC is that that students are getting prepared in pathways that are prepare them for a career in fields of need in our area. So our business partners sort of naturally come into our, like anything we do with our students. And so that includes something like this, where our students are doing a project and they have to deliver a presentation. So that's how we get our business partners involved, at least as far as this project goes, evaluating projects, having students ask questions and so forth.
And I think I put in the chat while you're talking, when we did the online the student presentations online. I thought it was so cool that you had all these business leaders from the area, you know, witnessing what the high school students were researching, and then we scored them, and the scores chose the winner. I thought that was so unique and special. So the next question, I love the Goose Chase activity. Did the school district negotiate the ED Law 2D contract, or can the product be used without collecting I'm not sure if those are L's. I'm sorry, I'm assuming personal information. So the app, the students just enter in like a team name. They don't log in individually. So there's no student information collected, and the pictures, this is the only time I've ever shared those pictures, and they weren't shared with the slideshow that I shared with the organization. Anyway, so I told them that I was not sharing with the library social media, so other students were not seeing them. All right, sorry if I missed it, but how much class time is
In terms of the groups that were in the library, so the groups that we sent to the library were typically probably about like 20, 25 students. So it was a relatively small group that visited.
So how much class time did students have to work on the project? If it was semester long, did any students have issues with time management?
Oh yeah. So this is a big one. Initially, like when I first started teaching and I did this project, I wanted students to do this entirely on their own, and I think that was somewhat a mistake, just because I think they need that guidance from teachers, and that because they're learning how to do research, and if nothing else, they need someone who's done this before and understands the process to do that. So this year was quite a bit, and that may just be because of the circumstances we were under, but I think I'm comfortable giving them quite a bit of class time to do this. And just to give you a timeline, they start this, we used to start it actually in November, and the project concludes in March usually. This year was a little different, but they have quite a bit of time to work on it and include some class periods too.
I'm just answering one question by typing it out right now. So the question is, did they have access to the college library databases? So we consider the P-Tech students kind of like a dual credit student. It's an interesting program where they're not yet taking MVCC classes, but they're part of an MVCC program. So for this special circumstance, we consider them kind of like a dual credit student. So we provided like a dual credit student login. So for this special circumstance. So normally the local area high school students would not have access to our databases from off campus. But they did take out a lot of books as community users too. What tool do you use for the mind map activity? So the tool I use for the mind map activity, I use Padlet for that. And I know there's other apps you can use, but I really liked the Padlet app. So for when the students do it, I'm going to have to find an alternative. They might just have to do it, you know, writing it down if they aren't going to be able to use that app. I know there's other ones, but I'm assuming they'll probably run into the same issue with their school computers not allowing them to use unauthorized apps. So we'll have to play around with that idea for next time we meet. And a favorite resource for background information. You know, it really ranges. I tell the students it really depends on your topic for what kind of source you want to use for background information. You know, sometimes reliable websites are, you know, perfectly fine. I use like Credo reference database for online encyclopedias, or the Gale eBooks collection for encyclopedia articles. But I show them a variety for options for background information. And having their topics beforehand was really helpful, so I could send them, you know, recommended sources. Do you show? Neil, I have not yet used Google Scholar for research purposes. I have in the past, but not with this group. I haven't used it yet. So that might be something I might use in the future. Right now, Google Scholar is not talking with our databases very well. I know I've worked for other libraries where Google Scholar and the online databases talk really well with each other, and it can link you to the databases, which was fantastic, but that hasn't worked for our library yet. So that's probably the main reason why I haven't used it. But yeah, I have used it for other classes before, just not this one. Is college readiness is one of the more pressing issues in today's secondary year. Are there any statewide initiatives grant to promote? I'm sure there are. I don't have any at the top of my mind.
I don't have any either.
No. I don't know, maybe CLRC has some in mind. Rebecca, do you want to have anything to offer?
I can't think of anything on our end either, but I'm just going to read it out again in case someone that's actually in the session maybe knows of any. But are there any statewide initiatives to promote college readiness? So if you know of any, please add them to the chat. I'm drawing a blank a little bit, so sorry about that. All right. Well, I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. If anybody has any, feel free to direct them, but the next session is starting in about 6 minutes. So I'll let you do your recap then, Jocelyn and Mike, because I see you have one last slide.
Yeah, so just in terms of our recap, I guess thinking about this in terms of takeaways. Don't be afraid to collaborate with partners in the business world. Don't be afraid to collaborate with partners at the college and high school levels to promote student learning. People are always willing to do it, and this has been a really awesome experience, and I think students have benefited because of that. And ultimately what that does is it engages students in the learning process. And my last point is one that Jocelyn was kind of making before, related to information literacy, that it just needs to be reinforced again and again. And the best example I have of this, some of these students that we were talking about today, that learned how to do research. 2 months later, I was covering a science class, and they were doing research for some type of project they were doing, and a student was doing something on the MRI. And what were they using for their research? Google, even though they knew they had all of their resources available. And so it just needs to be constantly reinforced, because I think without doing that, it's just not going to stick, because that instant gratification is something that students, especially at the high school level, gravitate toward.
Right, so please feel free to email either one of us. I would love to hear from you. And again, I would love to volunteer if you would like me to join your high school class. If you're local in person, I don't care. I'd be happy to visit, or online. I would love to speak with high school class again. I know you're going to be receiving copies of these slides in the future, but I do have this QR code that will link you to a shareable copy of these slides too, if you want instant gratification. But thank you all for joining us, and for sharing your ideas through the chat. I want to look a little more closer at those now too. So everyone have a great day.
Thanks, Jocelyn and Mike, and thank you everyone for attending. And I'm echoing